tal? Buenas tardes. A nombre de la Cátedra Alfonso Reyes, de la Escuela de Educación y Humanidades y de la Escuela de Negocios del Tecnológico de Monterrey, les agradecemos mucho su presencia y sobre todo su entusiasmo en esta tarde tan especial. Como ustedes saben, algunos historiadores y antropólogos coinciden en señalar que hace alrededor de 70,000 años, grupos de homínidos comenzaron a reunirse alrededor del fuego, tal vez dentro o fuera de las cavernas, para contarse historias. Y no solamente se informaban si había un león o un bisonte cerca del río, sino que construían ficciones dramáticas en torno a ese león, ese bisonte, ese río, el sol, la lluvia, la luna. Y que fue gracias a esta capacidad para contarse historias que lograron crear lazos que hicieron que esos homínidos que hoy conocemos como Homo sapiens pudieran sobrevivir incluso sobre otros homínidos tal vez más fuertes o más ágiles. De manera que los seres humanos nos hemos construido como tales, como seres humanos, gracias no solo a nuestro uso con las herramientas o a nuestra creación de lenguaje, sino sobre todo a nuestra capacidad para crear historias. Y en cada historia que nos contamos, se nos va la posibilidad de construir un futuro o bien de destruir los sueños. Como dice nuestro invitado de esta tarde, no hay historias inocentes. Hay historias que pueden llevarnos a levantar muros, a exaltar el racismo, a crear riqueza fuera de la legalidad, y hay historias que pueden llevarnos a fortalecer los lazos fraternos, justos, entre los seres humanos. De manera que cada historia lleva la impronta de la humanidad que somos y de la humanidad que queremos ser. Por eso estamos muy agradecidos en la Cátedra Alfonso Reyes de que un grupo de profesores del Departamento de Comunicación, muy particularmente la entusiasta profesora Cristina Cervantes, nos haya sugerido invitar a esta cátedra a uno de los teóricos, a uno de los maestros más importantes en el mundo en el arte de contar historias. Y estamos muy agradecidos también con el decano de la Escuela de Negocios, Juan Pablo Murra, de haber abrazado esta propuesta y de haber hecho posible que esta tarde tengamos hoy en el Tecnológico de Monterrey a Robert Mckee. Muchas gracias, Juan Pablo Murra.
Muchas gracias, Ana Laura. Pues muy buenas tardes, muchas gracias a los organizadores, Ana Laura, de la Cátedra Alfonso Reyes, a todos ustedes por estar aquí. La verdad muy contento de tener a alguien como Robert Mckee aquí en el TEC de Monterrey. Les platico un poquito cómo di yo con Robert Mckee. Como parte de mis responsabilidades en el TEC, hace 2 años nos empezamos a dar cuenta, platicando con diferentes equipos de la organización o con públicos, de lo difícil que era comunicarnos de la manera adecuada, de lanzar los mensajes que queríamos lanzar, de motivar a la gente como la queríamos motivar. Y me acordé de que en mi época de consultor, previo a estar en el TEC, manejábamos una herramienta que le llamamos la historia del cambio para procesos de gestión de transformación cultural. Me puse a revisar el tema, pero sobre todo se me ocurrió, dije, ¿a quién conozco que le pueda preguntar del tema de storytelling? Y un buen amigo, exatec, Adolfo Franco, productor de la película de Cantinflas, dije, él debe de saber de storytelling. Le dije, oye, Adolfo, ¿qué me recomiendas? Y no dudó un segundo en decirme Robert Mckee. Y resulta que pues Robert Mckee ya había pensado en esto, que él ya había pasado de dar clases y seminarios simplemente a guionistas de cine a pasar a darle clases a instituciones o empresas bajo el concepto de Storynomics. Y hace 2 años, hace 1 año y medio, me fui a tomar un seminario de un día a Nueva York con él, y estoy más convencido que nunca que sus conceptos y sus ideas son valiosos para todos nosotros. Ana Laura ya explicó muy bien la importancia de las historias para los seres humanos y para cada uno de nosotros como personas, pero en particular en el mundo de los negocios se han vuelto fundamentales. Y Robert empieza su cátedra, su seminario, diciendo que hay una crisis de mercadotecnia y una crisis de liderazgo. En los últimos meses he visto un par de encuestas que creo que lo confirman. En una encuesta sobre la confianza en las instituciones, esta es en Estados Unidos, en general ha ido bajando, pero en particular la confianza en las empresas es de solo el 18% de los americanos. Eso significa que el 82% no confía en general en las empresas. De la misma manera, la misma empresa Gallup hizo una encuesta en 140 países, en esta ocasión a los empleados, para preguntarle qué tan contentos estaban o qué tan engaged estaban, el término que usan los americanos, con su trabajo, y salió que solo el 13% están motivados y conectados de una manera positiva con su empresa. 63% están not engaged y 24% están activamente disengaged, o sea, con ganas de no pertenecer y no sumar en su empresa. Y seguramente hay muchas causas que producen esto, pero yo sí creo que una de las soluciones es aprender a contar mejor historias, a explicar mejor el porqué y el para qué de las empresas, a conectar con su propósito y con su misión, y de las marcas de igual manera a poder conectar mejor con sus consumidores y con sus compradores. Y bueno, dado eso, la relevancia y la importancia de tener a Robert aquí, y estamos muy contentos y esperemos que lo disfruten. Buenas tardes.
La mejor forma de conocer a Robert Mckee es a través de la dedicatoria de su famoso libro sobre guionismo.
Dedico este libro a la feliz memoria de mis padres, quienes de diferentes maneras me enseñaron a amar los relatos.
Robert Mckee estudió en la Universidad de Michigan la licenciatura en literatura inglesa y una maestría en artes teatrales, así como estudios de posgrado en cine.
Formó parte de la Asociación de Artistas Productores, una compañía de repertorio de Broadway, así como de la Compañía de Repertorio Toledo, el Festival de Drama de América y la Compañía de Teatro Aaron Dearon. En Inglaterra fue residente en la Compañía del Teatro Nacional de Londres.
En los años 70 inició su carrera como consultor y escritor de guiones. En 1983 fue nombrado Fulbright Scholar, formando parte de la Escuela de Cine y Televisión de la Universidad de Southern California, iniciando su carrera como profesor e instructor de sus aclamados seminarios.
Algunos años después, muchos de nosotros tuvimos la oportunidad de conocer sobre Robert Mckee gracias a su libro sobre escritura de guiones, hoy convertido en todo un clásico. El guión, sustancia, estructura, estilo y principios de la escritura de guiones. Se transformó incluso en libro actor en la película de Spike Jonze de 2002, Adaptation, en donde Mckee es interpretado por Brian Cox.
A lo largo de sus más de 30 años de carrera, Robert Mckee se ha destacado como asesor de guionistas, novelistas, poetas, escritores de teatro, documentalistas, directores y productores audiovisuales. Y recientemente sus seminarios y talleres sobre Storynomics son indispensables para muchos directores y creadores de empresa.
Desde 1984, más de 100,000 estudiantes han tomado sus cursos alrededor del mundo, destacando más de 60 ganadores de Oscar, 200 ganadores de Emmy y más de 100 ganadores de la Asociación de Escritores de América, solo por mencionar algunos. Su serie de televisión Real Secrets fue galardonada con un BAFTA.
Sus artículos son publicados en cientos de periódicos y revistas internacionales, incluyendo Harvard Business Review, The Wall Street Journal, The New Yorker Magazine, Swiss Business Magazine, RAI de Italia, CBN Weekly News and Morning Glory de China, Korea Times, Cultura de Moscú, entre muchas otras.
Actualmente continúa como consultor de compañías productoras de cine y televisión, tales como 20th Century Fox, Disney Pixar, Paramount, Time Warner y MTV, solo por mencionar algunas, y en empresas como Microsoft, Nike, Hewlett Packard y Siemens.
Storynomics es el término creado por Mckee para mostrar cómo aplicar una estructura narrativa en los negocios que lleve a incrementar los ingresos y lealtad de marca.
Los líderes de empresa encargados de la mercadotecnia reconocen que storytelling es el futuro del marketing. Se han dado cuenta que para tener éxito en un mundo saturado de publicidad, deben de poner sus relatos al centro de sus estrategias.
Para conocer qué es Storynomics y cómo utilizarle, la Cátedra Alfonso Reyes del Tecnológico de Monterrey tiene el honor de dar la bienvenida a Robert Mckee.
It's all lies. No, that was wonderful. Who is that? I think it's grand, just grand being here. Look at all of you. It's incredible. I have many people to thank, of course, the Technological de Monterrey for sponsoring me, along with the foundation of Alfonso Reyes, and of course our lovely director, Ana Laura Santa Maria, the Department of Communications, Professor Cristian Cervantes, and of course Business School, Juan Pablo Mora. All these people have worked so hard to put this together, and I'm very, very grateful. Today, the subject is the primacy of story, the centrality of story in our lives, virtually since the beginning of time. And this beautiful room, and all of you people here, are a perfect example of what we human beings do. Human beings are nesting creatures. We create nests, and we call these nests culture. And so all these great buildings, of course, our great cities like Monterrey, all of our great institutions, political and private and religious and so forth, educational, all of our grand art, everything we human beings do, in a sense, is nest making. And to live in our cultural nest. I'm sure you realize that if all we wanted to do was survive, all of this is unnecessary. You understand? It's all unnecessary if the only thing we wanted to do was survive. But of course, as human beings, we need much more than survival. It isn't enough just to live some years. It isn't enough just to feed your family. We want much more than that. What we want, it seems to me, is the answer to the big question. And the big question, of course, as it was posed by Aristotle, is how should a human being lead their life? This is the question that preoccupies all of us. Because life itself does not teach us how to live. How to live meaningfully. Because life itself, of course, as I'm sure you all realize, has no intrinsic meaning. People have said, Mckee says that life is meaningless. No, I've never said that. I've simply said that there is no intrinsic meaning in life. What that then requires each and every one of us as human beings is to make our own personal meaning. It's a responsibility of every human being to figure out for themselves what is worth living for? What do I get up each morning to do with my life? What is my purpose? What is the meaning of my life? And so all of us have to struggle then to try to find that meaning. And throughout human history, human culture, we have created the 4 great wisdoms to help us answer that great question from Aristotle. And so the 4 wisdoms, of course, are philosophy, theology, science, and art. Philosophy is, of course, study of knowledge, and to try to answer, as I said, that great question from Aristotle in a philosophical way. And the deep business of philosophy is to try to find this argument between is and ought. Is reality what is indeed, and ought is what we human beings can imagine should be, what ought to be. We can all imagine an ideal, the way life ideally would be lived versus reality, in fact, how it is lived. And this is the great struggle of philosophy then to resolve this contradiction between is and ought. Religion, theology, does it in its own way. It too is a struggle for meaning, trying to understand our purpose in a spiritual way. Science, of course, tries to dig into what is, into the physical world, to the social, psychological world, and to understand it profoundly in a scientific way, once again to give us guidance, to get an answer, a personal answer to that great question, how should a human being lead their life? And then finally there's art, all the great arts of music, and the visual arts, sculpture, painting, the temporal arts of dance and story, all the great art forms that give us insight and to enrich our lives in a way that allows us to live in a meaningful, purposeful way. That's how it used to be. The way human beings lived for thousands of years, did they take a little insight from philosophy, some inspiration from theology, some understanding from art, some beauty and understanding from art, and some science as well, to figure out how things actually work. And they would take from each of these 4 wisdoms and cobble together a personal meaning that allowed them to live with dignity. But that's how it used to be. Not anymore. Who today, in terms of philosophy, who today, seriously, is reading Immanuel Kant or Spinoza if they don't have an exam to pass? For more and more people in this world, religion is becoming an evangelical joke. Science, there was a time in history when we thought science would solve all of our problems. Back in the late 19th century with the industrial age and the advances of science into the 20th century, and now into this high age of technology, we thought that science will give us the answers. Science will penetrate the mysteries. Science will finally give us what we need to live a meaningful life. But it seems to me that with every advance that science has made comes just another level of toxicity. If science has done anything, looking back on the 20th century, what it did for us was make us all the more lethal. Thanks to science, we are able to kill our fellow human beings in greater and greater numbers. Art, art is exhausted. Simply is. Jackson Pollock or somebody painted a black painting from edge to edge black and said, that's a painting. Okay? So without philosophy, theology, science, where do people go to get meaning today? Where do they go? They go to the movies. God help them. They go to the movies trying to understand what it is to be a human being, looking for models of life, comic or tragic, to somehow give them insight, somehow enrich their lives because the other wisdoms seem to fail. And of all the arts, the most important by far in terms of finding meaning and enriching life is story. Music, of course, is wonderful. All the great visual arts and dance as well. All these are great, wonderful forms of human expression. But story is the most important form of all in terms of civilizing us as human beings. Because it is the work of story to make sense out of life. We don't ask a composer to make sense out of life. We don't ask a painter to do that. We ask them to create something beautiful and meaningful and exciting for us. But we go to the storyteller asking them to take this chaos, to take this life we live and try to make it meaningful, try to make sense out of life. Because stories are there then in some fashion, as I said, from farce to tragedy, in some fashion to try to answer that great question of Aristotle so that we can build a civilized culture. And so storytelling, by all means, is serious business. You can never allow yourself to fall into that notion, well, it's just entertainment. It's never just entertainment. All stories, no matter good, bad, or indifferent, all stories contain, express a meaning. That meaning may be ugly, that meaning may be false, it may be beautiful, it may be true, but there's always a meaning. And so no story is innocent. Every story either adds to civilization or subtracts from civilization. It's either making the world a better place to live or a worse place to live, but nothing is neutral. And when the storytelling goes bad in a society, the result is decadence and corruption, both socially and personally. And by corruption, I don't mean that word in the political sense of criminal, although God knows there's enough of that in politics. I don't mean it in the religious sense of sinful, although once again, there's enough of that. I don't even mean it in the original Latin meaning of rotten. By corruption, I mean a life that is shallow, narrow, insensitive, inauthentic, somehow false, intellectually and emotionally impoverished. It's a kind of mono-life. A mono-life is decadent, it's flattened, it's constricted, it's emptied out due to ignorance, addiction, fanaticism, cruelty, greed, or any of the other dark forces that suck the humanity out of human beings. And so the storyteller's task, and many of you sitting here today want to write, you want to tell stories for fiction or for business, for marketing, whatever. You want to tell stories. The storyteller's task then is not to copy life, not really, but to make a meaningful, emotion-charged sense out of life. And the world, as I said, needs honest, insightful stories to shine a bright light into the dark corners of human nature, and the dark corners of society, to express the truth of what it is to be a human being, the truth of how and why people and societies do the things they do. And we can do this, and we've done it for tens of thousands of years, because the mind itself is a story-making machine. What lives between your ears is a story-generating machine, so to speak. So let's look at that creature, the human mind. The mind evolved out of the nervous systems of billions upon billions of organisms through billions and billions of years. And over the last few millions of years, pre-humans added 5 milliliters of brain matter every 100,000 years. And as a result, I mean, you've seen the skulls and so forth. That as a result, the forehead, which used to be flat, got moved forward until it was straight up and down in order to leave room for this huge brain that was accumulating. And there came a point in time, no one knows exactly when, but the best guess is, by science, is that there came a point in time, millions of years ago, when because of the mass of this brain, there were just so many billions of synapses crackling within the brain, the sheer size of it, like spontaneous combustion, created the first human thought. And the first human thought, I'm speculating, of course, but the first human thought was, I am. The sudden realization that you are a self floating down the river of time. And at that moment, an animal became a human being, conscious of her own existence. I've always imagined that the first human being was a woman, because men are just not smart enough to do this. And she thought that thought, I am. She became conscious. Consciousness is not just awareness. I mean, animals are aware, right? Animals are constantly aware. They're always searching their environment, looking out for, for anything that might be dangerous. I mean, animals are perfectly aware. But consciousness goes a step beyond that. Self-awareness is to become aware of yourself. You see, all animals are aware of the objects around them, okay? But what makes us human is that the human mind turns itself into an object. What happened to human beings is a kind of mild schizophrenia. The mind split, in a sense, and it was able to step back and see itself as an object, as itself. For example, you know that expression that you're mad at yourself, right? I mean, how does that work? You understand? What do you mean to be mad at yourself? It means you step back inside of yourself and you look at yourself and you go, you idiot, right? And so the mind sort of split in two in that way. And that first human thought, I am, was immediately followed by the second human thought. And the second human thought was, and someday I will not be. That my time in time will end. And with that thought, the realization that you're going to die, and that death is waiting for you, and you can imagine that and see that ahead of you, at that point, dread flooded the human mind. That must have been a terrible thing for that first creature that stepped from being an animal to being a human, to come to realize that indeed their time in time would be over someday. And so they were not only afraid of death, of course, but it's more than that. You see, fear is an emotion that you have when you don't know what's going to happen. What flooded the mind was another emotion called dread. Dread is an emotion that you have when you know what's going to happen and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And we all know that in time we will die and there's nothing we can do to stop it. This dread of death then, as I said, terrifies us because we poor human beings were not made to live. We were made to survive. All biology, the purpose of it is simply to endure and reproduce, to survive. But to live, in the human sense of that word, in the full human sense, is unique to us human beings. And so that self-awareness then made life unlivable for those early first human beings. As terror, as I said, gripped the mind as they realized that life is brief, it is chaotic, right? I mean, we have no control over the weather, earthquakes, and so forth. Anything can happen to us. It is random, it is chaotic, and as I said before, it has no intrinsic meaning. And what's worse, perhaps, is that you cannot trust your senses because nothing is what it seems. All of life is a constant duality. What seems is the surface of life, what you see, what you hear, what strikes your eye, your ear, what people say, what people do. What seems is the surface, the sensory surface. What is the truth of what is really going on underneath that surface. And so what you see and you hear is just a surface. The truth is hidden from us. And so the mind found this onrush of time, chaos, enigma, and meaninglessness unbearable. And so to live in this actuality, it had to find a way, once again, to make meaning. And through the eons, the human mind evolved slowly, and it adapted, and it learned how to connect everything to everything else, how to create a unity out of all this chaos, how to work inside a multi-dimensional, multi-leveled, ongoing realities, your inner life, your personal life, your social life, your physical world, and how to weave complex, multiple causes and effects together. And this power to make sense out of life we call story. And so what is clear is that story is our evolutionary adaptation to consciousness. Once we became self-aware and conscious, we needed to find a way to make meaning out of the meaninglessness, and the mind then adapted to create stories. And this is what your mind is doing right now. It is sorting out the irrelevant from the relevant. Right now, each and every one of us is bombarded by 11 million different points of stimuli in every second of our existence. The temperature in this room, the air in this room, your posture in the chair, and on and on and on and on it goes. From inside of your body and outside, the mind is hit with 11 million points of stimuli, and it can only deal with about 40 at a time. And so the vast majority of life, then, the mind excludes. I mean, imagine trying to be aware of such an immense amount of stimulus. And then it takes a very tiny percent of actuality, and then creates a sequence of events out of it linked by cause and effect, moving through time, dynamically changing for better and worse, the heart and soul of story, to try to make sense out of what you are feeling at this very moment. Right now, for example, many of you are thinking, the fuck's he talking about? Why does this matter? If it has some meaning, what am I going to do with it in the future and so forth? But we learn how to think in this dynamic. Dynamic means moving charges from positive to negative, to take this dynamic life and create a meaningful emotional experience out of it, because story form then streamlines this deluge, as 11 million points of stimuli, into an efficient, manageable human reality. And what do you pay attention to? As I said, you can only know consciously at some level perhaps up to 40 things at any one time, and that's a big number right there. What you pay most attention to is change. The mind is always alert to change. If the temperature in this room suddenly changed, if it got much warmer, much colder, whatever, we would all react to it. And the reason that we react to change is because change threatens existence. And we have biologically evolved to be aware, instantly aware of anything that threatens our existence. So as long as everything is calm and consistent, we relax. But the moment things change, suddenly we pay attention, because we realize that change is a threat, that could put us at risk, and of course nobody wants that. We don't want to live without risk. And so the mind then is always alert to change. The data in our scientific technological world now, we are very keen to accumulate data. But data is not about change. And big data, of course, offers all kinds of wonderful possibilities, but it's far more limited than most people want to admit. Because what does data tell us? Data only tells us what, and it puts it in numbers. What has changed, converted into number. And so data notes the changes that are going on around us, and then puts it into a numerical form. And it's important to know what, but just knowing what would not allow us to live. What we need to know is how and why. That is what stories tell us. How and why what has changed has changed. Data tells us what's changing. Stories tell us causality. Stories tell us the how and why of change. The story, as I said, then fits the brain, because the brain reshapes actuality into story before you're conscious of it. The subconscious of your mind is sorting out every stimulus that's hitting you and eliminating most of it and concentrating on change and shaping it into a story. And all of this goes on, as I said, at a subconscious level. And to do this, then, to turn raw existence into a human reality, the mind evolved 7 powers: intelligence, self-awareness, other awareness, imagination, insight, correlation, and self-expression. First, intelligence. Of course, intelligence means knowledge. All the knowledge that you gather in your head and your ability to reason with it, to take knowledge and put it into form, build cases and argue, to make sense out of things in one way or another. Intelligence is knowledge and the power to reason with that knowledge. Self-awareness, we've already talked about. This is the self's point of view of itself in reality. Other awareness is what we call empathy. It's the power that we have to look into another human being, so to speak, and make this recognition. This person is a human being like me. We call that empathy. The realization that there's another humanity inside of that other person. And sometimes people take this a bit far when they find that humanity in their pets. You know how people are? You know? Right? Let me explain something to you. Your dog does not love you. The people in your family might love you, but your dog does not love you. Your dog needs you, okay? Because you feed that critter, okay? And if you don't believe me, just stop feeding your dog for a couple weeks and see how long the love lasts. Do you know that joke, the dog-cat joke? The dog says, "Oh, I just love the family. I just love the family. They're so wonderful. I can't wait for them to get home. I get so excited. I just love the family." And the cat says, "The family is staff." Which is why I love cats. You know, cats. I love cats. They have that attitude, you know. When it's convenient for me. But dogs don't. I don't know. So needy. Imagination is fantastic. The power to take pieces of reality and assemble them into things that do not exist. Not yet, at least, right? That's imagination. And insight, as I said, the mind developed insight because nothing is what it seems. And so insight then is the power to see through the seams to what is. And we need this to survive. The mind needs to know more than just what happens. It has to know how and why what happens. And so the mind studies the surface of things, and then with insight discovers the forces moving beneath that surface. And indeed, all well-told stories, this is what they do. Great storytelling takes us beneath the surface to give us insight into the hidden truth of how and why things change. Then correlation. Rarely talked about, but this is a fantastic power of the human mind. There's two ways, for example, to describe anything. You can describe things factually or metaphorically. So for example, you could say he has 10 and they are blue. Quantity, he has 10 fingers. Quality, they're cold. And then the color blue, that of course is data. Or you could describe it metaphorically. You could say his frozen fingers stood like policemen at attention. And metaphors then sharpen our understanding. It says everything, 10 of them and they're blue. But it sharpens our ability to understand that, to see it in a whole new way. This is creativity. This, they say, is a right brain thing. This goes on in your right brain. And in the right brain, what the right brain does is it takes experience and material from the left brain and it seeks out the hidden connection. What creativity is, in essence, is the discovery of the third thing. The discovery of the third thing that connects two things that already exist. There's a lot of romance, of course, about creativity. People want to think it's the muse, they want to think it's some spiritual thing that just descends out of the heaven into you and whatnot. And of course, that is all bullshit. It's just romance. Creativity is a human power to discover a hidden connection between two things that already exist. You cannot create ex nihilo. You cannot create from nothing. You can only create from what is already in your own mind. You understand? And this is why ignorant people cannot write. They may have talent. They may have great genius, but because they're ignorant, they're limited in terms of what they know that they could then recombine in a fascinatingly creative way to sustain a full-length work of art. So they may have moments of creativity, but they'll never be a great storyteller because there simply isn't enough knowledge in the left side of the brain for the right side to create. And so you can only create from what you already know. You take two things that already exist in your mind and find the third thing. So for example, a great poet in my country, Carl Sandburg, who wrote a poem we all read in school called The Fog. And in it is a line that goes, "The fog moved in on little cat's feet." The fog moved in on little cat's feet. He has found the third thing. He has found a relationship between fog and cat's feet. Of course, there is no such thing until he says there is. And suddenly, something new, something that never existed before, is put into the world, the beautiful metaphorical relationship between fog and cat's feet. And then self-expression. We have the power to take all of this inside of us and express its insights and analogies to other people in story form in order to make sense out of life for each other. And this thing we call the mind is fantastic beyond belief. Human beings do not really fully appreciate what you have in your head. When I was a student, I was an astronomy minor, and so I love astronomy, and I'm always reading up on the advances of this great science. And the universe, needless to say, is a fantastic thing. But you know what? It's just a lot of stuff. There's a lot of it, but it's just stuff. Compared to the mind, my next door neighbor in Connecticut is a research physicist for IBM. And you know what he's trying to do, him and his team? They're trying to create the next generation of computers based upon human thought. And his attitude toward computers is contemptuous. He said, they're just big calculators, They're just big machines. He said, compared to the mind, compared to human thought, they're child play, right? And so they're trying to find a whole new way to compute based upon the model of human thought. And every time I see Mark, I ask him, how's it going? They haven't got a clue. All right? They don't know where to begin. So I said, we have this great power then to make story. So let's take a look at story. And I think the best way to begin to look at this marvelous thing that the mind creates is to look at what it is not. I mean, that's how you define something, right? Something is because it's not something else. You have a black circle on a white canvas. That black is black because it's not white. You understand? And the white is white because it's not black, all right? And the first definition of something is what it is not. So let's look at what story is not. Number one, story is not narrative. I don't know about here in Mexico, but in my country, people want to use the word narrative as if it's a synonym for story. It's just not. And to use it as if it were the same thing is to commit a categorical error. All stories are narratives, fine, but not all narratives are stories. I was having my yearly exam with my doctor, and he was talking to me about what I do, and he said, story, why don't you use the word narrative? He said, it's got 3 syllables, and it sounds academic, right? Sounds serious. Stories, there's children's stories, cartoon, you know what I mean? And I said, no. I said, to do that is to commit a categorical error. Stories are narratives, but not all narratives are stories. And you ever notice what children do? Children give you narratives. Did you ever listen to a child tell a story? Here's how children tell stories. I saw, 100 pesos on my mommy's dresser, and so I took it, and then I went to the candy store, and then I tried to buy some candy, and then the man wouldn't sell me the candy, and then he made me stand there, and then he made a phone call, and then my mommy came, and then she gave me a spanking. That's a narrative. That's how children tell stories. And then. If that kid is going to grow up to be a storyteller, they learn not to do that. Okay? Start somewhere else. My mother, the bitch, kicked my ass for no damn reason. It's called hook the audience, okay? Get their attention, all right? You know, it's all going to get out. You understand? It's all going to get out, but it's not going to be a boring and then narrative. And so I urge you professors, to get real about this. If you want to talk about narratives, fine, but you cannot pretend that narrative and story are the same thing. They're simply not. So, for example, a process is a narrative, but it's not a story. Automobiles going down an assembly line, being put together piece by piece, becoming an automobile at the end, is a process. It's a narrative. It's not a story. Do you understand? It's a narrative. Sometimes when I'm working with private clients, business clients, I'll say, tell me the story of your company. And you know what they tell me? The organizational chart. Okay? Because they think that this hierarchy is a story. Or else they tell me the story of your company, and they'll give me a history. We did this, and then we built that, and they'll give me a history, right? That's a narrative, but it's not a story. You know why it's not a story when they do that? When they give you the company history, because they leave out all the negative events. If they included the negatives, when we went bankrupt, when we were taken over, when the negatives happened, then it would become a story. But as a just a chronology of and then, and most important, I don't know about here again in Mexico, but I do know my country. A story is not a journey. Do people use that word? Journey? Yeah, stop it. Everywhere in America, people talk about the journey, the journey. Life is a journey. Life is not a journey. A journey is you get on a bus in Monterey and it takes you to Mexico City, okay? That's a journey. Right? Life is not a journey. It's an uphill, constant struggle, winning and losing, like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the mountain. It's not a journey. All of those nonsenses are narratives. Here's how you know the difference between narrative and story. With any of this. You ever been at lunch with someone and they are telling you a story and boring the living hell out of you? Right? You know why? It's not a story. It's a narrative. How I did this and how I did that, yada, yada, right? It's a narrative. If they were actually telling you a story, you'd be fascinated. So what is a story then? Just to give you some sort of definition. It is a dynamic escalation of meaningful, emotion-charged, conflict-driven events that changes a human being's life for better or worse. A series of events, dynamic events, meaning moving positive, negative, that builds, progresses, escalates, and then brings about change, tragically or positively, negatively or positively, in the life of a human being. Now, this then is the best. Let me see if I can get it up there for you. Whoops. No. Can the what's on my screen here be projected up there, please? There we go. This is so there's a shadow over there, but that is the best graphic I'm capable of. And so some of you people might be very gifted with this, right? But I've struggled for years and years trying to put story in a graphic form for my students, and this is the best I can do. It starts out, and what you can't see over here is this is just too big. But I'll show you. Over here, can you make it smaller? Yes? Not quite, but we'll see it later. Over here, life is in balance. People take action, and the world cracks open, and they do this in cycles of rising action until they make a crisis decision, and the best of stories, in dilemma, take a climactic action in an effort to get what they want. Okay? Now let me then break this down for you piece by piece. Okay, here's life. All right? Here's some poor human being's life. It has its positives and its negatives, its ups and its downs, but whose life doesn't. And this life exists in 4 dimensions, in time and place, 2 dimensions of time, its location in time, Does the story take place in a contemporary setting or somewhere in history, or a hypothetical future like in science fiction, or a timeless world like in fantasy? And its duration through time. How long does the story span in the lives of the characters? Is it that rare story where the storytelling time and the lifetime are actually equal, like that famous film My Dinner with Andre, which is a 2-hour film about a 2-hour dinner? Or does it cover years or even decades of life? And then its location in place. In what town does the story take place? What streets in that town? What buildings on those streets? What rooms in those buildings? Up what mountain? Across what desert? Up to what planet or whatever? What is the physical setting? And then the fourth dimension, of course, is a social setting. There's a cast of characters. And so at what level of conflict is a story set? Is it primarily about physical conflict, people battling the great forces of nature, lethal diseases in the air, time, space, not enough time to get something done, too far to go to get something else, all the forces of conflict in the physical world? Or is it social conflict, characters in conflict with the institutions in their society, the corporate world, the criminal justice system, the educational world, the religious world, and so forth, all the great institutions? Or is it about personal conflict? Personal conflict means relationships of intimacy, friends, family, lovers. Or does it take place in the inner life of a human being, the way great novels do, where they simply invade the inner life of a human being and dramatize the entire story, like a great writer like Virginia Woolf, who dramatized the entire story at the level of the stream of thoughts going through a character's head. And so you have 4 dimensions of the setting: its location and time, its duration through time, its physical location in the world, and the level of social or human conflict involved. And at the beginning of a story, then, all of this is in balance. It has its little ups and downs, but it's more or less in balance. But then something happens. Oh, I'm sorry. Before you get to that, in that world, of course, is a cast of characters, and there's a protagonist, which is the central character. Sometimes a group of people, family becomes a central character. You can have one single protagonist or a group becoming a protagonist. You can have multi-protagonist stories where, did you see this wonderful Argentinian film? What the hell is it called? Wild Tales? Yeah, right? Which put together about 6 stories end to end, with different protagonists. And so you can have protagonists come in a wide variety of sorts. But this protagonist generally must be, again, empathetic. The audience now must be able to look at that character and think that thought, that is a human being like me. Not in every way, obviously, but some aspect of that character, some quality within that character strikes us as a human quality, a positive human quality, and that character then becomes what we call the center of good. What happens is when a story comes up in front of an audience or a reader in a book, the reader or the audience inspects the value-charged world up there, trying to sort out the positives from the negatives, the things of value from the things of no value, the rights from the wrongs, the goods from the evils, the winning and the losing, trying to sort out the value charge up there, seeking what we call the center of good. And hopefully that is a positive glow somewhere within the humanity of the protagonist. Even if the protagonist is a despicable, unlikable human being in every other way, there's some quality in them that makes them the center of good. You've all seen, for example, Breaking Bad, right? And Walter White is the protagonist, right? And he's a terrible human being. But what is it within Walter that makes you think the thought, he's a human being like me, therefore I want Walter to get what Walter wants, because if I were Walter, I'd want the same thing for myself. What is it? Power, maybe. Power, I would think, would be the right answer. Inside of Walter is another person, right? Whose name is Heisenberg. And Heisenberg he's a genius, and what he wants is power. He wants to build his empire. And so we think, if I was a loser school teacher, nobody, I'd want to be Heisenberg. I'd want that power, and I'd want to build my empire. And so Walter then becomes the center of good. And so the protagonist, there may be other centers of good, but the protagonist must have that quality that draws your empathy. And finally, this world, as part of this positive and negative charge here, this world has a value, a certain core value. Now, life is very complex, and the story, of course, may have many, many different values at play in the lives of the characters, but at the heart of the story is one core value that is the deep subject matter of this story. And when we use the word value, often people use the word value only in its positive charge. They say, truth and loyalty, love. Those are values, right? Truth, love, loyalty are values. No, they're half a value. A value is a binary of human experience. A value is both a positive and negative charge. So, for example, it isn't just truth, it's truth-lie. It isn't just loyalty, it's loyalty betrayal. It isn't just love, it's love-hate. Rich, poor, right, wrong, justice, injustice, freedom, slavery, winning, losing, power, weakness, success, failure, life, death, courage, cowardice, excitement, boredom, a meaningful life versus a meaningless life, and on it goes. All of those qualities of human experience that can shift their charge from positive to negative, back to positive, negative. That's what we mean by a story value, a core value. And at the beginning of the story then, this life, in terms of its value charge, as I said, is in balance. But then something happens. We call the inciting incident. And the inciting incident simply means the starting event. In English, for those of you, to incite simply means to start. But it has, in English, it has a connotation of starting with a certain power. And incident simply means event. And so the inciting incident is the starting event. It's the first major event of any storyline. And when this starting event hits, it could, of course, turn life to the negative. And it can only happen one of two ways. You can only start a story one of two ways. It could start by accident. Accidents often radically upset the balance of life. It's an accident, for example, that the shark ate that poor vacationer in the Sheriff's Harbor. Remember Jaws? Right? Just a coincidence, an accident. Shark, could have gone hungry that day. Could have eaten somebody in somebody else's harbor. Did you ever see Jaws 2? Did you see that? Or were you spared that? The shark in Jaws 2 eats 10 people in 24 hours. I know because I counted them. There were 10 of them. And I was watching this film on television with my son, Paul, and he was just 8, 9 years old. And as you can imagine, it's a very violent film, a lot of blood in the water. So I got concerned about the effect of all this violence on my son. I tried to make a joke. And I said, Paul, there goes the 10th person into the belly of that shark. Now, at an average weight of 150 pounds per person, that's 1,500 pounds of humanity. That's 3/4 of a ton of people. That's a hungry shark. And Paul looked at me and he said, what I don't get is why it doesn't eat fish. And I had no answer for it. Just he's on a low iodine diet. So the starting event could hit life and turn it radically negative, or it could turn life radically to the positive. Somebody, you can start a story, as I said, only one of two ways: by accident or decision. Right? That's it. Either a decision made by the protagonist or a decision made by somebody in a power relationship such to the protagonist that their life is turned to the positive. And so the starting event, could be there's a knock on the door, and you open it, and it's a lawyer there to tell you that an uncle you didn't even know you had has died, and he's decided to leave you, $10 million. And suddenly, you're rich, but under pressure, because the moment, I think to see if this will work, the moment things turn positive, they immediately turn negative. You know what I'm talking about? You meet someone and you fall in love. Positive. You have just opened a very special door to hell. Right? Does anybody who's ever been in love knows? Okay? And so whichever way it happens, turning negative or positive, then negative, it's going to turn negative. It's going to establish what we call the negative floor. All stories at some point, if not immediately, then eventually, must reach a negative floor. Because you need a negative floor so that when things turn positive, they feel positive. You see, if it's just positive, happy ending. What is that? Same thing though, if it's just negative, tragic ending. That's called suffering. And suffering is not story. Suffering is a static state of emotional experience in which nothing changes. And if nothing changes, nothing happens. And if nothing happens, there is no story. Suffering is just like happiness. Happiness is a static state of emotional experience in which nothing changes. Again, if nothing changes, there's no story. And so you have to hit a negative floor so that the turning points have impact. Now, if this should happen to you, if an event were to come along in your life and radically upset your life, either positive or negative, what would you want? What would any human being want? Say again? No, not necessarily. What do you really, what do you deeply want? To restore the balance of life. No one wants to live without some reasonable control, some reasonable sovereignty over their own existence. What we want is to put life back into balance. And so the effect then of the inciting incident, the starting event, is to arouse in the protagonist what we call the object of desire. That which the character feels, if she could get it or he could get it, would put life back into balance. Doesn't need to be happy, it just needs to be balanced again. You understand? It might be happy, but what you want is balance. And for every story, this is different. No two great stories ever are the same. What this particular protagonist feels would restore the balance of their life. That is what they pursue throughout the story. And it could be something physical, like in Jaws. You want, the sheriff wants a dead shark, right? That's his object of desire, a dead shark. In films like, have you seen, have you seen just these recent, some wonderful films, Manchester by the Sea? Wonderful film. What does that character want? Peace of mind? I think that's probably, somehow to take a step toward a balance. This is what's happened to him in that story, of course, has his life permanently out of balance, and he tries this and he tries that, he tries to hide from it in a shit job, and then his nephew and all the rest of it. He tries different ways just to find some peace of mind to put his life into balance. And so what he wants, let's say, is peace of mind, or it could be a dead shark, or anything in between. You understand? And so the object of desire is unique to every story. So the protagonist then wants to restore the balance of life by achieving somehow this object of desire. And so now they must act. They must do something in pursuit of this object of desire. And so they will take an action based upon their sense of probability. All human beings act from one moment to the next based upon each individual's sense of probability. Probability simply means what you think will happen when you take a certain action into the world, right? You think if I'm standing on the street, if I look down the street and I see, this taxi is far enough away that if I cross the street now, in all probability, I'll get safely to the other side, right? You call your friend Juan, and you say, Juan, I can't find Christine's phone number. It's really important. I got to talk to Christine. Have you got it? He says, yeah, it's in my my iPhone, and he goes and gets you the number, and you apologize for interrupting him, and he says, what are friends for? So you take an action. If I call my friend Jack, or Juan, in all probability, Juan will get me Christine's number, right? And 99% of the time in life, what you expect in probability to happen, happens. You take an action, the taxi slows down enough to let you get safely to the other side. You call your friend Juan, he interrupts his day and gets you the number that you need. You take an action based upon your sense of probability. And a sense of probability for every individual is the sum total of your living experience. You are whatever age, you have learned life awake and sleeping, right? Everything you've ever read, everything you've ever heard or said has taught you who you are, who other human beings are, how the world works, and so forth. And so you act based upon what you think will probably happen. And this, of course, is one reason why human beings behave so differently, because every human being has a very different sense of probability in their head based upon a very different life that they've lived. And so they take an action based upon their sense of probability, but then the world reacts. And their expectation, their sense of probability is violated. What they thought would happen doesn't. Instead, the world, from the physical, social, personal world levels of conflict, the world reacts more powerfully than they expected, reacts differently than they expected. You call your friend Juan, you say, Juan, I know you're busy, but it's really important. I got to talk to Christine. I just don't have her number. And he says, Christine? Christine? How dare you ask me for that woman's number? And he hangs up. Right? Suddenly, life is interesting. You know, what the hell's going on between Juan and Christine? The famous gap then opens. The gap in reality between what a character thinks will happen and what really does when they take action. It's 6 o'clock, and I was supposed to be done by 6 o'clock, but we started about a half an hour late, and then we had a little interruption. Laura, is it all right if I go just a little while? Okay, because I want to finish this. So the world reacts in whatever way, in a way the protagonist did not see coming. And what they then discover is necessity. Necessity is the truth of life. Necessity is what, in fact, will necessarily happen when you take an action. And you cannot know that necessity until you take action in life. You can hide from life all you want, right? You can be passive and dreamy and think you understand yourself, think you understand life, but you do not know anything really till you take action based upon your sense of probability, trying to get the world to react in a helpful, enabling way so that you can reach your object of desire. But then you take action and you discover the truth of life as it reacts in a way you could not see coming until that happens. And so story is created at that place, so to speak, where the subjective and objective realms collide. Where the subjective expectation of a human being, what you think will happen when you take action, and objective reality, what in fact happens when you do, when the subjective expectations are violated by objective reality, and those two lives, your inner life and your outer life, crash together, that is the friction that gives story its fire and its energy. And so the world reacts in a way the character didn't expect, and so the character then gathers themselves and they take a second action. And they take this action, now the second action, having learned from experience. You know, it's that thought, well, if Juan is going to behave like that, you know, well, if that's how people are, if that's what's going on, then I will do this instead. And so you incorporate, it's really fantastic what the mind does. It instantaneously reconfigures reality from one moment to the next. The world reacts in a way you didn't expect, and you simply incorporate that unexpected reaction into your understanding of life in the world, and then you take another second action based again on your sense of probability, but now you've learned. But once again, the world then reacts, and it may react in a way you don't expect, and there may be whole cycles of this. This may repeat and escalate, but eventually the character will exhaust every possible action that they could take in an effort to get what they want, save one last action. And they must decide then what action to take in a last effort to get what they want, and that becomes the crisis decision that the protagonist makes, and the action they choose to take then becomes the climax of the story. The character either gets what they want or fails to get what they want. End of story. And as I said, this pattern can repeat itself any number of times. A particular storytelling may have many stories. You have plots and subplots. These great long-form TV series, as we mentioned, like Breaking Bad. I do a whole day's lecture on the modern long-form television series, and one of the series rather that we look at carefully is Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad has 26 storylines, 26 stories weaving in and out, and 256 major reversals, so-called acts. I mean, it's just massive. Or it could be a wonderful film like 45 Years, where you have an inciting incident. She realizes that her husband has always been in love with another woman all their lives, and it has one final turning point at the end. And so that simple form may be the form for the whole work, or as I said, it can compound into enormously complex stories. Now, I said story is a meaningful emotional experience, so let me quickly look at how, first of all, stories create meaning. Meaning is created out of a story's turning points. A character takes an action in an effort to get what they want. The world reacts in a way they don't expect, and the natural, and when the world reacts in this unexpected way, the audience and the character are surprised. You know, what's going on between Juan and Christine, right? Suddenly you're surprised. And the effect of surprise then is to arouse curiosity, the question why. So you might start from the negative, wonder why, try and get to the positive, or the other way around. But the question why, the natural effect of surprising people is the human mind wants to know why. You see what happened, but you want to know how and why did what just happen. And so the second, third effect rather, of turning points is insight. When the question why pops into the mind of the audience, their mind rushes back through what story they've seen, trying to make sense out of life, trying to answer the question, why? Right? Why when you saw Manchester by the Sea, right? You spend that whole first 20, 30 minutes of the film wondering why, because you see this guy doing things you didn't expect. You know he's not a janitor, right? At every turning point, then it's a surprise. And then you flash back to that night when he got drunk out of his mind, stoned on cocaine, etc., right? And suddenly you get a rush of insight. Suddenly you understand why he is such a mental wreck, right? And so the effect of turning points then, when he comes home, and remember, I don't want to spoil it for you, but there's a hell of a moment. He comes home from shopping, and you suddenly go, oh, Jesus. And it all makes an incredible deep sense. Then the story must move off into a new direction to set up turning points yet to come. And so when life changes from positive to negative or negative to positive by the violation of expectation, the violation of expectation is the lifeblood of story. And when that surprise happens, you wonder why, and then suddenly you go back and it makes perfect sense. And so everything prior to that turning point then has to be written two ways. As what we call the setups are heading toward a payoff, this turning point. And therefore the setup has to be what seems the surface of things and makes perfect sense. But when the turning point comes and the mind rushes back through what story they've seen so far, suddenly they get insight. They suddenly realize all that was going on underneath the surface, underneath what seemed, and they discover the truth of what is, and they get a rush of insight. That is how you give intellectual understanding to an audience, by cracking open reality, sending them back to the story they've seen so far, seeing what was hidden. What they saw at first was explicit, but what was hidden is implicit. And suddenly they get the implicit truth that was underneath everything. You know that moment in the story? Been through it all your life, right? I mean, literally, your jaw drops. You go, and you suddenly are in a rush of insight. That's intellectual. Now, at the same time, you're giving the audience an emotional experience. Story is the simultaneous experience of meaning and emotion. Unlike life, life separates meaning and emotion. You have a certain understanding of life, and then things happen, and you get an emotional experience, and then you think about it, and it changes your understanding. Your new understanding then sets you up for another emotional experience, right, that you experience in a different way, and that gives you a deeper understanding. And so in life, as Aristotle said, life separates meaning and emotion, first one, then the other. But in story, we put the two together. Storytellers are sort of in the epiphany business, the simultaneous experience of meaning and emotion. And it works like this. Presuming that the audience is in empathy, because if an audience is not in empathy, they will not feel any emotions. You only feel emotions about characters for whom you have empathy. Presuming that the audience is in empathy, and that the audience understands the values that are at stake. When the values move from negative to positive, the audience has a positive emotional experience. So let's say you have a character who comes into a scene poor at the negative in terms of money and all that means for survival. They struggle, and Act 1 climax, they become rich. While this is going on, an empathetic audience will have a positive emotion as they see this character clawing their way out of poverty. But once the charge of value takes place, the emotion dissipates. Emotion only happens during the transition. But once he's rich, the audience goes, oh, great, he's rich. Okay. What happens next? You're always asking. What happens next? What happens next is they're going to move from the negative, from the positive rather, to the doubly negative. It's going to get worse than it was. And during that transition, the audience will have a negative emotion. But once the doubly negative happens, you know, oh shit, he lost all of his money. And worse, he's borrowed money from the loan shark, which is worse than being poor, you know. And once that happens, then the negative emotion evaporates. And so you're going to take them from the doubly negative to the doubly positive and create a positive emotion. So emotions take place during the changing charges of value. For example, whoops. Yeah, there's a wonderful little storytelling that you guys know the soap called Dove? This company was just virtually disappearing, and they made an ad campaign, a marketing campaign that saved it. Have you ever seen it? It's about where women are called in and asked to describe themselves to an artist. You ever seen this? Right? And he does a sketch. And then other people who have met the woman describe her to the artist, and he does a second sketch. And then the women come in and they look at the sketch of how they describe themselves versus the sketch about how other people described. And of course, other people are always far more generous because women are terribly self-critical. Men, not so much. But women are examining every, you know, my wife is just beautiful, okay? I'm swearing, she's beautiful. And she has a perfect face, hardly, and I said, what wrinkles? She says, these wrinkles, you know, you have to get a magnifying glass. But she sees them, right? And so the value at stake in this is self-criticism versus self-appreciation. So the women are very critical of themselves, but then they see the sketch done by what other people see, and it moves from the negative to the positive, but it's what other people see. So they have to make a decision whether or not to believe other people, and so the story moves from the positive to the negative as they doubt what other people see. But then they choose to believe what they see, and they arrive at self-appreciation. And so this story goes from self-criticism to self-appreciation dynamically in that way. And if you've ever seen it, everybody who sees that Sketches of Beauty, I think it's called, Sketches of Beauty, everybody who sees that goes into tears. It's really moving. And so there's the whole story itself. Life goes out of balance with the starting event. Characters take action. The world reacts in ways they don't expect. The values change then from positive to negative, negative to positive, dynamically, till they finally make a climactic, a crisis decision to take a last action. They may or may not get their object of desire. That is story in a nutshell. And all of you then are struggling with this, trying to use story in a way to make sense out of life in your work. And I realize, of course, that what I'm talking to here is a room full of leaders. You have a program here, the Ambassadors Program, right? You bet. And your universities then are educating people in order to give them a leadership position in society to help raise the standard of life for everybody in Mexico. And more than today, more than ever, people everywhere in the world are struggling to make sense out of reality. And when people are in crisis, they don't need data. They got all of that they can handle. What they need from a leader is a vision based on reality and then expressed dynamically and honestly through cause and effect in the form of story. And so your task as leaders then is to take this form into your public lives, your private lives, and what great leaders do is they pull the story out of reality. Now, for you who are creating fiction, for you who want to be filmmakers and television makers, you're going to use your imaginations and create stories out of your imagination. What business leaders do, what public leaders do, is they reach into reality and they pull the story out of reality. They don't make it up. I mean, I didn't start the lecture with my apology, but I have to apologize for Donald Trump. I said earlier that when the storytelling goes bad in a society, the result is decadence. And Donald Trump is a perfect example of someone who uses story, uses the form of story not to tell the truth, but to bullshit. And so you people, they pull the story out of reality. You don't bullshit. You use story then to express the truth of life. Because if you put knowledge into story form, people will understand your point of view, and they will orient their ambitions in life through your intentions. If you want to lead, you have to get people to understand where you're taking them. Tell them a story that expresses what you want in the future. And if you tell the story beautifully and honestly, then they will want what you want. And they will join with you in a positive enterprise. So if you express your solutions and your strategies then in an insight-filled story, it'll harmonize with the mind of the people listening, because their minds are story-making machines like everybody else's. Then they'll merge their future with your goals. A truth-filled vision in story form will power leadership, and your leadership will make a better world. That's it from me. Thank you all. It's been great having a chance to give this little lecture.